Welcome to all of you. I'm Willem Kraus. I'm going to be the facilitator this morning of this great session with Dr. Arnold Smit. I hope you're all well. We're going to have a presentation from Dr. Arnold Smit, and then after that we really invite you to participate in terms of asking questions, making comments and so on. But this is quite an important topic when we talk about building values-based organizational excellence. And I'm sure you will have your own sort of questions, which you can pose to Arnold during this morning. So we contracted with you to have precisely an hour, and we'll try to fit in everything within that hour. I've learned that on online events, webinars, an hour is quite a short time, so we'll try and stick to it. Yes, I know that we have quite a wide range of delegates from various sort of disciplines and also industries. So welcome to all of you who are joining us this morning, and I'm sure values within organizational perspective is quite important to all of you. So let me kick off immediately by introducing Dr. Arnold Smit. He is an extraordinary associate professor at Stellenbosch Business School and an associate professor of management and leadership at the IEDC-Bled School of Management in Slovenia. Probably the place with the most beautiful campus and setting, Arnold, in the world. You can Google it and you'll see what I mean. He's also the owner of WisePraxis Pty Limited. So Arnold's work focuses on leadership, values and ethics, sustainability and organizational governance. He teaches in academic and corporate programs and facilitates organizational values, workshops and integration processes. I can assure you his passion is really to facilitate various processes. So just one or two things about his academic background. He holds an honors degree in philosophy, an MPhil in applied ethics, and a doctorate in theology from Stellenbosch University. So his career spans parish ministry, human resources management, consulting, and management education. Amongst others, he also serves as a non-executive director of the Ethics Institute, a trustee of the Seed Educational Trust, and a member of the Globe Ethics Pool of Experts. Furthermore, he is a fellow of the School for Social Innovation at the Huguenot College down at Wellington. He is also the author of this great book, Making Values Real, Focus on a Yeast Effect, which we published in 2025. So one or two other things about Arnold, and I've clarified this with him before, I cleared this with him beforehand. As you can notice, those of you who know Arnold well, his hair is quite thinner than it was before, maybe when you saw him a few weeks ago. Arnold's been diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. So Arnold is going through a very, very strenuous period with, amongst others, severe bouts of chemotherapy. So Arnold, I thought I'll share this with the people, and I can. As I said to Arnold, there are more people that can pray for you, Arnold. So we really honor you for your courage to come still today and make this presentation about something that's dear to your heart, and that you have spent so much of your career in building values within organizations, and for that we honor you as well. So over to you, Arnold. Welcome and good morning to you.
Thank you, Willem, and thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And for those who have come, I hope that we could have a good conversation afterwards. Maybe it's not the norm on your webinars to have a presentation, but I thought this time around, in comparison with our previous conversations, I'd like to present a few touch points, which I think could make the conversation afterwards more meaningful. So maybe just a quick kind of overview of what got me into this work. I think many people would eventually agree that when I refer to Mary Gentile with the world-renowned work that she's done on making giving voice to values, that she has come to a point where she said that most of us, if we think about the ethical confrontations, the values conflicts that we experience in life, our problem is not awareness and analysis. We know when we are in the terrain of moral uncertainty. We know when we are facing a values conflict. We know when we are not seeing eye to eye with other people around something that's really important in the space of our relations and our values and morals. Intuitively, we know it. We can analyze it. Case studies can help us to understand it. Our problem is not that part. Our problem is really about action. How do we take action to do what is right when we know what is right? And thereafter, since 2015, when I kind of discovered this, it put me on the path of program development and various presentations and projects and so forth. And what I would like today is not so much to share the personal focus of this work. Over time, I've become aware of a different kind of need. And that is, how do we systemically integrate this into our organizations? It's one thing to have a personal focus, but really to make it work from an organizational perspective, I think this is where the big challenge is in order for us to live and work in organizations that really make something of this and disperse their values throughout, and also at the same time benefiting from the fruit of that. Because if we look at what we try to understand around values in this space, we are not talking about the things that we value in life and prioritize in general. We are talking about that which is integral to how we live, how we relate, how we decide, eventually also how we strategize, operate, transact, decide, behave, and so forth, in order to build the trust and the reputation that we would like to have internally as well as externally among our stakeholders, or us and our stakeholders in our organizations. And that takes some work to do. This is what I try to do in the book around the topic about making values real. But I think ever since, over the last couple of months, my focus shifted to the organizational aspect. I don't want to say much about the diagram in front of you, but we would all agree, together with Mary Gentile, that these 5 values in the middle more or less represent that which we all can really subscribe to. You will not find people differing about this. It may be differently understood, expressed, and so forth in different cultures, in different settings, but by and large, you will find all of these, some of these, when we talk about personal values, professional values, societal values, and organizational values. And I want to focus on organizations today specifically because organizations tend to have some of these in their values statements, but also combined with what we would call strategic or operational values. Excellence, for instance, innovation, client centricity, and so forth. But somewhere around, you will see that respect and compassion or fairness or something slips in and also forms part of the organizational values code, if you want to say so, and give us this very, very unique mix that we find in organizations. So specifically, and it's part of having written the book, but specifically over the last few years, and I will refer later to 3 projects that I think were significantly large projects that I worked on. There are kind of 7 principles that I would like to broadly discuss. And just say that I think when you really want to work on values-based organizational excellence, you at least have to understand these 7 things. The first thing to understand is that value creation and values integration are 2 parts of the same coin. Because in value creation, we talk about measurable performance, whether it's financial, whether it's around product output, whatever we want to measure. But value creation is what we exist for when we participate in the work of our organizations. That's what we produce and sell. That's also an indicator of our success. But we also need to take care of values integration, which is about our moral and relational well-being. That's equally essential for trust and reputation. The one cannot go without the other. And you need to build them and integrate them simultaneously. Because we also know, and we have lots of examples of a parent success who eventually is being found out to be built on immoral grounds, if you want to say so, ethical lapses, and so forth. The second thing is you cannot just remain with exposing people every now and then to your ethics architecture, telling them about your policies, requiring them to learn your policies, having the necessary compliance and so forth in place, and call them once or twice a year, half an hour or an hour or so together just to reinforce, or just have forms of e-learning, for instance, available that they can follow on their own. We have to follow what we call a whole person approach, because if you want to do this kind of development, training and development, if you want to do this effectively, you have to address the person in terms of knowing, being, and doing. You have to talk, you have to work with the whole person, not just the knowledge part, but also the being part and the action part. And that takes something to bring people into that action space so that they do have the capacity to stand up to and voice their values when it comes to the point. Just their values, your values, as the values of the organization. Then it is also the case that you cannot just work on the level of the individual. You also need to work on the level of the team, the level of we, the level of the specific unit where people work together. But you also have to work at the level of the business, the organization in itself, in terms of integrating, but you also have to work at the interface between the organization and society, because this is where you exist. No organization exists ever just in isolation. I will say something more about mastery just now, but these are the 5 practices that I refer to and discuss in my book, specifically in the 8th chapter, that there are 5 essential practices that you have to master in the process. First one is what it is about. Sorry, I think I've left out one there. Meaning making, I will talk about that a little later. Voicing, what does it mean to voice values? Internalize values personally. How do you integrate it throughout the organization? And how do you cultivate it through training and doing so over time? But it's a mastery of those 5 practices that you have to have a good understanding of, and also a practical rollout. Over the years of my work with organizations, I found something interesting. And this is quite often that leaders might think that they have graduated. That they have graduated and that values training are actually for other people. And this can't be true, because leaders are human beings like all the rest. Leaders are being tested and tempted like everybody else. Leaders might also observe ethical lapses and moral conflicts like anybody else can. But the other part of it is also that leaders can often stand in the way of employees exercising their values by means of how they behave. And at the same time, leaders might not necessarily have the maturity to live the values to the same extent that other employees in the organization might be or might be able to. So leaders can also learn from everybody else. I think implicitly I say something else there as well, which goes to the 6th principle that I would like to highlight. And that is that although we would expect leaders to set the example, to set the tone, as we are used to be saying, values need to be communicatively shared by everybody. In other words, values do not belong to the domain of leadership. It must be democratized throughout the organization, which I think is a very important principle. And therefore, what I have found in the training that I've done, the workshops that I presented, and so on, is that you need also to do your training in such a way that people can discover for themselves across the layers and across the functions in an organization, is that we can use these words. We can take them, we can speak them, and we can act them. And we can make sure that they work. But this is not an intellectual exercise in the first place. I've already said it's a whole person exercise, and you need to do it in such a way that people embrace it also in that way. So communicatively shared means democratizing, make it the possession, the ownership of everybody else in the organization, if you want to make progress really in this regard. And then it might be that we sometimes only attend to values transgressions or moral and ethical lapses when there is trouble in the organization. Or we could say that it's kind of sitting in the domain of the ethics architecture and your legal and compliance functions and so forth. No, values are integrated, part of who we are, and it also entails, it's part of what we do in all our activities, in all our divisions, and across all the layers in the organization. Because the values are there because we are there. It's something that's true to who we are and how we relate, how we behave, how we act, whether internally or externally, but it needs to be dispersed across everything. It's always present. It's never, never absent. Why? Because we are there. Our problem is sometimes that we say, yes, we have values. The underlying question is, yes, but do the values have us? And this is actually what this conversation, I think, is really about. Do our values have us, specifically in the organizational space? So a quick word about the mastery of these 5 practices that I've highlighted. I've said meaning making. What is meaning making about? It's about the question, not just do our employees, our people, do they know the values, but do they know what it means? Can they apply it when it's essential and when it really makes sense to do so, or when it is urgent to do so? Voicing. Can they stand up? Can they speak out? How do they speak out? Have we helped them, taught them, built their capacity for speaking up and speaking out, to act or not to act in terms of the values that we want to embrace? Internalizing comes in when we talk about personal internalization. Do we help people, in a sense, I almost want to say, feed their souls with living in a values-based manner? Not just by means of the kind of people that we have, but what is it that we help them with so that they can grow into that and really become the potential of people that we want to have in our organizations, and what needs to be done in order to do so. Internalizing, and this comes very close to the subtitle of the book, The Yeast Effect, is about how do we spread it throughout? How do we make sure that whatever we do, wherever we gather, the decisions that we make, the meetings that we have, the processes and practices that we have in our organizations, that it's fully internalized? So what are the underlying activities and processes and practices there? That's the integrating part. And then cultivating is really about how do we provide training. And training cannot just be, as I've already said, it cannot just be an hour or so a year where we remind people or try to update people about our ethics architecture in our organizations. There's a good part in the book. There's a whole chapter on cultivating, which speaks to how do we educate, empower, and build capability, and how do you actually do your workshops around that. With that, I actually want to say it's a very practical book. If I want to say something about the book in that sense, it's a guidebook to help you to understand how do you do it. That's all being made available through what I've written in the book. But on the right-hand side, Those four things: barely begun, first steps underway, celebrating breakthroughs, and mature practice. Where are we in the process of doing so? So in the newest version of the book that's coming out shortly, I've put another piece in. There's a playbook at the end of the book, but I put another piece in, which is about how do we have conversations about where are we around these 5 practices? Have we barely begun? In other words, we just have it available, but nothing more than that. Do we have first steps underway? In other words, do we do something more constructively around it? Can we really celebrate breakthroughs? In other words, do we have stories to tell where leaders, employees, in whatever situations that I've been, that we could see that the work that we put in here, that it's bearing the necessary fruit? Or can we also say already, yes, but we have come to a point where we can speak about mature practice? So just a little bit about 3 projects where I think I've learned something about, where is an organization currently with respect to something. So the 3 big projects that I've worked on over the last few years was one in health, one in education, and one in business. And I just quickly want to compare the 3 because I think there's a lot to learn. And the 3 bullet points speak to the same thing in each case. So in the case of health, we had it was a 4-year project. It was sponsored. In the case of education, it's about a 7-year project already. It's not sponsored, but promoted. In other words, the leadership, in a sense, recommends it. And in the case of the business example, it's budgeted for. In other words, it's become an item in the budget, at least in some divisions of that particular business. And I mean, it's a significantly large business with around between 15 and 20,000 employees. But how we selected in the first case around health was a criteria-based selection because we worked with 6 hospitals in a specific region, and we always want to make sure that we cut across the bureaucratic or administrative and health disciplines, and that we cut across the layers of authority in these organizations, but that we also bring people in the region together in groups of about 20 to 25 at a time. So we had very specific criteria. People put their hand up, but we also had a way of selecting them so that we could compose this kind of diverse groupings, because that's what you really want to do with values, is you want values to build the interfaces around relationships and collaboration. And the one thing that we've done there, and you might be surprised because people say, you know what, we've got lots of time for other kinds of training, but really not for ethics and values. We took people away for 2.5 days at a time. Doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, people in admin and so forth. They set aside the time so we would be able to do deep work. But then in the end, the sponsorship closed. So in other words, the work is ring-fenced, and how do you continue? You can only rely on what you've done. In the educational setting, self-selection was the order of the day. Departments, smaller divisions, and so forth. Faculties could choose what they want to do, but there were also open workshops where individuals could attend. And it was really very much given to people in leadership, people in specific divisions to decide for themselves. But we focused more or less on 1-day to half-day workshops. And it was kind of a single concentrated intervention for whoever attended. In the business example, there was a leader, or is a leader, who really, in the biggest area of the business, who embraced this totally. And there's no choice in terms of participation. It is integrated participation. And it's dispersed throughout conferences, workshops, and so forth, and always intermingled with other activities and themes and so forth. And now we could really start seeing that it has become embedded in that area, because what we were able to do was always over time to gather as much data as possible so that we could follow an evolving evolutionary approach and could always be asking the question about what is next. And we are on the verge of building real internal systemic facilitation capacity so that people can take over the work and become examples to other employees that they really can do it as well, that they are not dependent on the inputs of a specialist in the process. So now one can ask yourself the question, so where are they on the scale? So we could say, I think, in terms of the health example, that we could see celebrating breakthroughs, but due to the kind of ring-fenced nature of the sponsorship, we would never be able to say whether it has come to mature practice. In the case of the educational example, we could say areas in that organization kind of barely begun. Some took it serious, and there are really good examples spotted all over the organization where you could see, but there's kind of first steps underway, specifically for those who attended and so on, and really some who you can say that they are celebrating breakthroughs, and you see the value of that, of what is being done. But we are not at a point where you could ever speak as over so many years of mature practice per se, that you could see, but the whole organization is dispersed throughout by this approach. There's hope in the business example because of what I've already distinguished in terms of the way in which they approached it. Get it into the budget. Make sure that there's integrated participation. Embed it throughout. Do not just depend on specialists, but embed it really in people and leadership examples, and do not only just depend on your learning and development division in the company. I'm getting to the end of the presentation. There's a part in the book, specifically for those of you who might have the book, there's a part in the book where I speak about 3 roles, because this is about who are you and I in this whole process. And I think each of us exercise 3 roles, depending on your position in the organization. Specifically when we talk about really embedding and integrating and building organizational excellence. The first is really the personal one. And personal means, how do I show up? How am I present? What is the quality of my interactions with others? Am I willing and capable to voice my values and so forth? Simply just in terms of how I participate as an individual in the organization and its processes and practices. The functional part, I think, is often the one that is misunderstood. Because we tend to raise the flag when there is trouble. But we really need to ask the question, if I'm in HR, what's my contribution? What can I do? What can I do in terms of diversity and inclusion? What can I do in terms of values-based behavior in the organization? Am I sensitive in terms of how people are remunerated? And so forth. What are the kind of things that might bring the values conversation to bear if I'm in HR? If I'm in finance, how do I think about financial stewardship? How do I think about honest and transparent accounting? How do I think about and how can I help the organization to mature about its investment practices and so forth? Also, finance's role in terms of distributing the profits of the organization and so forth. If I'm in sustainability, what are the things that the lens that I have on the organization? What are the things that I need to see in terms of the organization's footprint? In terms of the sustainability requirements that might be put there by external regulators and so forth, the expectations of the market, expectations of customers and so on. If I'm in marketing, how do I represent the organization? Is that we represent in terms of quality and integrity and so forth, is that a true version of what we produce or how we serve and so on? And I can go to legal and compliance, I can go to manufacturing and so forth, but there's a functional lens that each and every one of us could bring to building values-based excellence in our organizations. And there's a part in the book, page 106 to 111, where I expand on these functions and how they could play a role. The last one that I want to highlight is the one around leadership. If I lead a team, if I have people reporting to me, how do I set the tone? How am I responsible for delivery, the delivery of others? How do I do performance development? How do I plan for meetings? What are the values sensitive items on the agenda that I need to think ahead of and ask the question, so how am I going to lead and facilitate and conduct this specific conversation and also the decision-making that might be following through from there. We are so rigid in terms of our agendas. We just flow through, and the uncomfortable things we sometimes put at the end, and they stand over to the next meeting. But if I lead, and I have people that report to me, how can I be proactively sensitive to that which needs to happen in a meeting space that can actually be to the benefit of building a values-based, not just only building a values-based organization, but building a space where my people can have the freedom and the confidence to really exercise the values that we are serious about. The one thing, there's a lot of stuff being written, which I discovered also more recently, for instance, around values and voicing values specifically, and what's often being referred to as psychological safety. I prefer maybe to more speak around emotional safety. And the lesson is never take silence in an organization as a signal that things are well. Never take that as a signal that things are well. When there is real psychological safety, people do have the confidence. They bring their best. They participate in that which is innovative, and they help to build a moral culture, much more so than when there is silence, and we then just say silence is golden. So I hope this has given us a space for a conversation for the next few minutes. But I thought I would like just to share these few things to maybe deepen our discussion.
Great, Arnold. Guys, you have the opportunity now to pose questions, or you can use the chat or the Q&A for that purpose, or make a comment and so on. Thank you for a great presentation. And while we're waiting for people to participate and ask a question and so on, I'm going to ask you, Arnold. All right, there are a couple of things that it was quite a mouthful. But you mentioned deep work, where your intervention in one of the companies, or no, it was specifically, I think, the health education, the health example, where they had to go, where they went away for 2.5 days or so on. How important is that deep work as opposed to what they call sometimes bite-sized training and so on, you know? Would you like to elaborate on that?
I think there's a place for both, because you are not always able to attend to both. But the one thing that we need to realize around values-based work is that values live and flourish in relationships. They live and flourish in human interaction. They come alive when we can sit around the table, sit around the fireside, and have a conversation about the things that really matter, but also at the same time where we're in a position to discover the stories, the challenges of other people, and realize that we are not alone. Bite-sized learning does not necessarily give us that opportunity, except if we find a way of doing it consistently over time and we can track what we are able to do. But if you really want people to be in a space where you democratize values, where you want to optimize the possibility for conflict management, lower the temperature around certain things and so forth, you need to build an environment of trust, and an environment where people can experience their common humanity around the challenges that they have in life. And in this particular case, what we saw afterwards, specifically in the health example, and by the way, I describe rather in full the health example in chapter 6 of the book. What we have found is that was the upside afterwards. Decision-making, collaboration, conflict management, and the freedom to confront. All of those things have actually improved among the participants. And this is not just in terms of hearsay. We have also followed that up with published and peer-based, peer-reviewed research where we have found this to actually be true. So you might not have the luxury of deep work always, but if you can do some deep work, I think there's more benefit to be obtained from that, provided that you follow it up afterwards as well to keep on strengthening that you have tried to accomplish.
Okay, thank you. Nicola, yes, it will be, the webinar will be available. We're going to post it on our site on YouTube, so we'll send you the link. Arnold, Algernon Adonis, he tackles the elephant in the room. And that is, how do we make values real in a country where we are challenged by total moral decay?
He's the elephant in the room, but then at the same time, and I think this is what Mary Gentile's work on giving voice to values was so intriguing for me and so helpful in the end in terms of understanding how that can be done. This is also included in my subtitle, The Yeast Effect. I'm not trying to say that we should try to kill the elephant for a start, but we can follow small steps, small victories, by helping people to understand a very important practice and principle, which once again is described in the book and also in Mary Gentile's book, Giving Voice to Values, which is what she refers to as re-scripting. The one thing that we sometimes misunderstand is all the rationalizations that we offer, and the rationalizations that actually lead to this very problem that is now being raised. The rationalization, for instance, of everybody else does it, so why can't we? Why can't I? Or the rationalization, listen, it's not such a big issue. Don't sweat the small stuff. It's only a few rands here or a few rands there. So if nobody gets hurt, it can be done. Or this is not my responsibility. That's also rationalization. It's for people with more authority and influence that I have. Or it's for the division next door. It's for another state department and so forth. But don't look at us for it. Or the one that I think is perhaps in most cases the more severe one in our experience is, you know what, if I stick my neck out, this might be a career limiting thing. I have dependencies here. I have a conflict of loyalties here, and I better care for myself before everybody. Now, if we take this into account and we go back to our organizations, and let us focus on the organizations because I'm not able to tackle the whole problem here. We'll never be able to tackle the whole problem. But we do have ethics architecture in our organizations. We do have policies. We do have regulatory frameworks. We do have people who want to do the right things. And the one thing that I think that Mary helped me to understand was that the point is not so much about the use of ethical language. The point is about finding arguments and building conversations that you can bring people back to who we are, what have we agreed to be, what binds us together, what is the best business case on the table with respect to a specific, best and ethical business case with respect to a specific thing on the table, what do our policies say, and so forth. If it is okay that something has become mediocre, why do we have a policy that actually speaks to the best standard? If we say, listen, this is not really such a big issue. What about the question? Is it okay for it to be published in the media tomorrow? If it is something that sits in the domain of performance and delivery and so forth, in other words, in the area of responsibility, and I let it go because I think that's got nothing to do with me and I don't make a plan, or I'm not having a conversation with somebody at least to see whether we can do something about it, it just deteriorates further, and so forth. So this is about building the conversations, building the arguments, understanding what we need to integrate into how we have our conversations and make our decisions about this in terms of our kind of end goal. So I realize, I mean, we are in a very, very complicated environment when it comes to this. But that doesn't say that if we follow the yeast principle, doing the right work where it's needed to be done, even in small portions, build the capacity that we need to build, helping people to build arguments in the face of ethical confrontations and so forth, then we've given up. So there's a lot in the book about it, and I'm not going to answer the question as a whole, but I do think that it's not about conquering the whole thing at once, but it's about who we are and how we engage and interact with when we are faced with challenges of this nature.
Arnold, we've got two great questions here. I'm going to handle the first one or read it to you. To an extent, you have, I think, answered it already. Now, Sophia says, thank you, Arnold, for the very insightful presentation. I was really intrigued when you asked, we have values, but do our values have us? Could you please elaborate on how we can ensure that our values have us?
Yeah. I think that, right, so what do I say with it? To start off with, I think we all know the well-known expression, the values on the wall, but they are not real in practice. So we're very, I think, aware of that gap, that which is espoused and stated and even published, and that which happens on the floor and in the daily interactions in terms of where we work. So what I try to say with that is we need to be aware of the fact that we could leave those values in nicely formulated statements as concepts that touch neither here nor there. And we just assume that people will know what they mean and act accordingly. It's almost like what we sometimes might experience in worship environments where the sermon was very good, but what happens afterwards? So we know what to preach, but it's the gap towards practice, in a sense, that we need to fill. This is where meaning making comes about, and meaning making is about unpacking those values in communicative spaces. Now, once again, I go back to the book. Both in the beginning of the book as well as in the playbook, the addendum at the end, I explain how you can do this. But what I normally do with people is asking 4 questions and having conversations around 4 questions. Take a specific value, and the question is, what does this value mean? Whether it's a moral or an operational or strategic value, what does this value mean in practice for us? Not the Googled or the dictionary meaning of it. What does it mean for us in practice? The second question is, if we get this right, what do we benefit? If we get honesty right, what do we benefit? If we get respect right, what do we benefit? Responsibility, fairness, compassion, excellence, innovation, customer service, whatever you have in the mix. If we get this right, what do we benefit? If we neglect, violate, ignore it, what do we harvest as a result? What happens? And then there's another question. So what is the state of this value amongst us? So if we're honest and we talk about, do we really live this? What is the state of this amongst us? And there's another question, which is, so how can we build this value? How can we make sure that in our practices, in where and how we work, that we can build this value? So this is not the only answer to the question, but you see what I'm trying to say about meaning making. Unpack, help people to unpack to master what we try to bring across in our value statements. And then the next part then follows easily. So when we have values conflicts, how do we deal with it? Do we fall prey to our rationalizations, even now that we know? Or is there a better way to deal with this when we fall into values conflicts and so forth? And how do we then re-script, come to a different and a better way of action? But this is really what you need to do, is to help people with meaning making if you want to start bridging the gap between the espoused values and your values in practice. And by the way, I have never found any person that I've worked with, and of course, the population that I've worked with is a drop in the bucket, but I've never found somebody who actually doesn't want to live their values from a personal perspective. Now, in an organizational space, it becomes more complicated, and therefore we need to do more in order to make sure that that which we espouse, that it's actually enacted.
Okay, but now that brings us to, thank you for that. That brings us to the next question from Joseph. He's asks, as a leader, you said we should never interpret silence as all is well within the organization. Are there other signs that a leader must consider in an environment of silence to diagnose a deeper problem?
Well, I think the fear of speaking up, of course, specifically from lower order employees, or the fear of speaking up amongst colleagues and so forth, is a signal. You just might not just always know about it. But the one thing that quite often happens is that if you don't treat a problem where it starts, and specifically internally in the organization, the problem doesn't disappear because we do not attend to it. It pops out where we don't want it to pop out. And that's quite often in the press, or it's popping out in a case against the organization. It's popping out in gossip, in various circles and so forth. And in the end, you can't control it. Therefore, it is so important to make sure that you build an emotionally healthy and psychologically safe environment where people can bring themselves, contribute to their full, and so forth. So one of the things I think that I've over the years, even prior to starting this work, that I've often experienced in organizational spaces is what we refer to triangulation. Triangulation is simply a different way of talking about gossip, corridor talk, stuff that's not being dealt with in meetings because there's silence, but afterwards there's corridor talk about it. So people don't trust the decision-making forums that they have, but yet they have agreements or conversations about something, or building coalitions against something, and so forth. So triangulation for me is quite often the surest example. And triangulation is really when somebody doesn't want to confront something that is problematic, and then brings in a third party, and then that thing or that person, which happens to be problematic, is never confronted really directly, but there's a cloud that's building around the problem, building around the person, and so forth, and it's never being effectively addressed. So silence in an organization is not golden, participation is golden. And from that perspective, it's important to build a space where people can really be themselves and speak. So in one of my projects, there was an interesting thing. Once we have taken the bull of psychological safety by the horns, there was an increase in speaking up, because we have siphoned, if you could say so, the space between managers and employees. And there's also another thing that we've done. We must also, I think, have empathy with leaders, because leaders are also under these kind of pressures, and they also seek psychological safety. They also want to function in an environment where there's not a lot of talk about them or around them, but they also can freely interact. So yes, it's something that you need to systemically look at. and build an environment where this is possible.
Thank you. Arnold, let's talk around quickly the crisis, managing the crisis when there was a serious breach of implosion of values and so on. I mean, it's how do you rebuild that trust that's been broken, especially if it's in the public sphere? But we don't need to look at those sort of catastrophes. We can talk about smaller ones as well. How do you rebuild it?
Well, I would say the one thing is to step away from rationalized excuses, and put it on the table and create an environment where we can talk in safety around something such as that. The one thing I do think that we should not do is to come down on people like a ton of bricks, because then you just break it even more. So acknowledge it, build an environment of trust, build the necessary conversations. It would be very ambitious to say that there would be some things that you can solve all things. I think that's too ambitious. It could mean that some people will have to leave. It could mean that you have no choice but to leave because an environment could just become so toxic that you can't remain there anymore. But I really believe in the communicative capacities that we have, that we can start again, that there is something such as a second chance in life, given the boundaries that we are talking about. I mean, not all things could go for I think, a second chance, but if there was a breach, is how do you heal? How do you bring together? How do you communicate about it? Is it about hanging people up in public and leave them there to dry? Or is it a matter of understanding the common vulnerability and brokenness of us all, and then start working from that space? I think there is perhaps the best energy if you want to work with healing broken relationships. It is interesting that and I know that you cannot compare apples and pears here, but I do believe that amongst most South Africans and perhaps many other people around the world is that to the extent that we are spiritual people, and to the extent that we participate in spiritual practices, we do believe in the power of reconciliation and healing. And yet, when we step out of that space and we step into business and we step into the organizational context in which we work, we think that we can fix everything with legalities and compliance. That's also a gap I think that we need to attend to.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Luann asks, I've often heard the statement, let's just get to, values tell us what the right things is to do. Emotional intelligence helps us do the right thing consistently, even under pressure. Would you agree with this perspective, firstly? And if so, how can organizations intentionally develop emotional intelligence to ensure their values are consistently demonstrated in practice? Luann, I think that's another webinar on its own, but can you please, a few sentences,
Let me
Arnold?
let me start by saying I have not researched that question. There's an interesting relationship and there's interesting research, Leanne, around the relationship between emotions and values, emotions and ethics, and so forth. And by means of saying that, also emotional intelligence and values-based behavior. So I think a starting point for me, specifically in terms of how I do workshops and training in this area, is also to help people understand that our emotions are the windows into our values. that creates discomfort within us is a signal of something that we need to attend to, specifically in our interactions with other people, in our transactions, where we might be engaging with clients, with stakeholders, etc., etc. Specifically in the areas where we might notice behaviors that might be undermining our organizations and their best interests and so forth. So our emotions are the windows into our values. This is a very old principle. And the things that we feel uneasy about, comfortable about, anxious about, angry about, deeply disappointed about, might already be the first step towards something here is not okay. But then also at the same time is how do we then turn that into, this is a values conflict that we are dealing with here, and how do we bring this to a place where we can solve it? And this is where we also need to say, and this is what I would like also to maybe conclude on this question with, emotional intelligence is then also, I think, raising for us the necessity or the importance of then not acting in a way that we violate those same values. If I treat somebody else in a values violation in a disrespectful manner, it's a signal of a lack of emotional intelligence. So I think this is a kind of a reciprocal question that might need a separate webinar.
We'll do that. Arnold, I'm going to ask you lastly, and it's a bit more personal now. You've mentioned a couple of times, you quoted Mary Gentile. Now, for the audience here, she wrote the foreword also to the book, and she authored her own one, Giving Voice to Values. Now, in the foreword, she says, and I'm going to quote her, she talks about a crisis of faith that she experienced, in the sense that feeling that my work was at best futile and at worst hypocritical. Have you ever experienced that same feeling in the values-based work that you're doing?
Okay. So in Mary's case, one needs to understand that this was in her work as an ethics professor, where she was still kind of captivated in the awareness analysis space before understanding that we need to follow through to action and build methodologies and help people to master the necessary practices and habits. So you need to understand that this is where her statement is coming from. So I've always found, Willem, not necessarily to the full extent, but that this work is giving people hope. And therefore, I've continued to do it and believe that it helps people, because values in this particular sense is not something for business or for organization or for government. It's equipment for life. And where people have gone through a process where they say, you know what, I came in here and I kind of expected a dry ethics lecture. And this is the least that has happened. I feel empowered. I've not necessarily solved my business problem, but I've solved a problem in the domestic environment between me and a friend, and so forth. I've got more and better insight around that. So that, in a sense, gives me hope, because I've never found a person that doesn't like that idea of living better and happier amongst other people, whether in the domestic space or whether at work or elsewhere. If you want to ask me what I've often found in terms of giving me less hope, then it's strategy facilitation that happens once a year.
Okay, let's leave it there. Arnold, we've come to the end of the hour. I just want to make one observation about the book. When I received the manuscript from Dr. Smit about on the manuscript about the book, and I read through it, I could actually do it in one shot. It was wonderfully written. It was so practical. it gave life to values, and it really describes how you can make this part of your DNA and the organization's DNA. So it's not a theoretical sort of academic piece of work. It's really practical, and there are also in the appendices sort of templates for people to, or organizations to follow to implement it and to really make it part of the organization. So Arnold, thank you very much for a great session. We really appreciate it. And firstly, we appreciate your work in this field. This has been a life journey for you, and thank you very much for that. And at the same time, from all of us, we wish you all the best in this tough journey that you're on. We're sure you're going to get through and can continue with your work, because there's still a lot to be done, as you may well know. So all of the best, and thank you very much for sharing this, your expertise and your knowledge and your passion around this with our audience today, and with people who are still going to sort of look at the video afterwards. Thank you very much. And to all of you who attended today, thank you very much. And we hope you will find this useful, and we will post it and let you know where you can get hold of the video. Thank you.